I'm talking about it. I know I took some time off, but listen, sometimes you gotta talk about some things, learn about some things, so you can talk about some things to the YouTube people, folks. Do you care about the WNBA? As I've been on my little hiatus, and I sit back and I watch the interwebs because I'm always on the interwebs. Sometimes I just don't feel like recording. But as I sit back and I watch the interwebs and I see things that are trending, I've noticed Caitlin Clark has brought a spark, no pun intended, to the WNBA. And I ask you people, I ask my girl, I ask the people on YouTube, I ask everybody in the world, do you care? Like seriously, like when you really sit back and watch WNBA, do you really care about what's going on? Are you a gambling degenerate and that's why you're watching so you can just put more money on it because you kind of realize she's going to shoot the lights out? Like, what is bringing your attention to WNBA, or is this just a mere fad? Because I've noticed there's been a lot of talk about like three players kind of like particularly. I think there's Angel Reese, Caitlin Clark, and then there's like this Cameron Brinks girl. And Angel Reese and Cameron Brinks, they are good looking to some degree. They're on what you call it, women's basketball standards, they are like model tens. In regular women standards, they're like, yeah, they're good looking women. And then Caitlin Clark is literally just shooting the lights out, and she's interesting. I guess she's the Steph Curry of that era. But what I look at, I say, as the product of the WNBA, like, is this going to be sustainable over the next decade? Like, will Caitlin Clark's melt into the WNBA just become a boring story at some point? Which is, okay, this girl can shoot a lot of threes. It's kind of entertaining. She's like Steph Curry. Or is this just going to pretty much just die off like most things in WNBA? Because at the end of the day, it's not necessarily that it's women competing that is drawing viewers not to really watch, but it's more so that they're competing against the NBA and men's college basketball. And that's a difficult one to compete against because there's only one room or one basically rodeo in town, kind of like the NFL with football. Like there's the CFL, there's Arena Football League, there's a bunch of other football leagues. Like the NFL is not the only football league, but for people's attention span, it's very difficult for somebody else to go into another league and like find that to be interesting and watch and have any type of long term investment, like as far as interest, fandom, in any of these other leagues because they pretty much fly by night. They disappear. They don't last forever. Like the CFL's been along for a long time, but it had to go to a totally different market in Canada to have any semblance of being able to be sustainable. And even then, they're not making anywhere near the same revenue as like the NFL does, which would be like because the NFL is like an international product. The NFL is literally everywhere across the world. Now it's primarily in America, and America has like the most dominant field. Or North America has the most dominant field when it just comes to sports in general, except for like soccer, I guess you would say. But typically, if you want to make money in sports, you need to get the American audience. And so anyway, when you come with the WNBA, the problem is like one player can't transcend the league and get the league to be to a point where we actually all want to watch. And then Caitlin Clark also needs like a rival. She needs somebody else that she can be going against that would bring some type of storyline in place that will want us to pretty much watch this second rate product. Problems for my camera. The camera is having a little bit of malfunctioning. But that's the big issue when it comes to the WNBA shit. It's like, how do you make a sustainable model for a product that is subpar to the original product, which is the NBA, which is way more interesting to watch because it's dunking, it's more physical, it has the same skill set, like we still see the same skill behavior, but you get dunks, you get more physicality, you got guys yelling at each other, and there's a longer history. It's very difficult to be like the little sister league and be able to uprise and still be on the same platform as the males. Well, not even the male, but as the big boy league. And so it's interesting because I don't see this being sustainable. I think at some point in time, I think like the hype of Caitlin Clark will eventually die off and she'll just become a player. Yeah, she'll probably make some money, but largely it'll be quite irrelevant to watch because it's like, why are we watching? What's my investment? I'm watching for one player for an entire league. And people can say like, okay, it's like the Michael Jordan. But even when Michael Jordan was existing, there was a long history of NBA players like from Magic to Bird, Bill Russell, Will Chamberlain. There's a bunch of other guys that got to the point where it elevated. You really can't name me too many WNBA players that elevated the game to the point where we got like our Michael Jordan. Like Caitlin Clark kind of is like the pioneer. Now somebody's gonna come out the blue and say Sue Bird Or Lisa Leslie. Bro, most of you guys can't tell me what position Super played or what position Lisa Leslie played, how long they played for, what great whatever you call it, achievements they made. You can't tell me any of those things about those. You can't tell me what franchises Lisa Leslie played for, what franchise Sue Bird played for. You can't tell me anything about the history of the WNBA. I bet most of you, you ask them what year the WNBA started, they probably wouldn't give you an answer. And that's not to say that it's a bad thing. It's just there's no fandom to be behind it because the primary watcher of sports is males, is men. Women don't watch sports. So a league that is built for women has no women viewers. I can ask my young lady, hey, Mrs. Apex, have you ever watched a WNBA game? No. No, never watched it. I think if you ask most women, have they ever watched a WNBA game? Chances are it'll probably be zero. Well, I shouldn't say zero, but the grand majority of women have never watched a WNBA game. And the only people that are going to even try to experiment into watching WNBA games would be dudes. And it'll be creepy dudes because it's never going to be like a dude that has some shit going on in his life. It's going to be creepy guys. Like that one guy who was the reporter who was hollering at Caitlyn like, hey, that thing that you do with your hands when you make the love sign, can you tell me about that? And she's like, well, I do it for my parents. He's like, well, if you do that for me, if you do that for me, we're going to have a good time. That was creepy. Those are the type of people that cover the WNBA. You don't get the Stephen A. Smiths, the Charles Barkleys. You don't get the TNT. You don't get those type of people covering WNBA games. You know why? Because for those guys to cover that game, they make more than the entire league in that night. So it's not, they don't have the expenses to be able to pay out people because they're supplemented by the NBA. Which means if it's a non-profitable league or if it's a non-profitable business venture, you're working off a charity. And if you're working off a charity, you can only work off the goodwill, which means you'll never be able to really grow as a league because there's nobody that really wants to pay. Because the only people that are going to pay are people who want to give charity. People who are giving to you, giving back to the game. Like Kobe. Kobe was a staunch supporter of the WNBA. You know why? Because he didn't have any sons. Kobe had one son. He would have said, fuck this WNBA shit. But instead, he had a daughter, and his daughter was good at basketball. R.I.P. Gianna, or Gigi. R.I.P. Kobe. This is not to make fun of any of that shit. But the only reason Kobe had any type of vested interest in the WNBA was because he had a daughter that played basketball, and that's the only way he can live metaphorically or whatever, live through his daughter or live through his kids' hoop dreams was through his daughter who was good at basketball. Other than that, Kobe would never give a fuck about the WNBA. You know why? Because once again, it's not interesting. There's no reason to watch it unless you're gambling on it. So the only type of people you're gonna, and that's the same thing with the WNBA. There's people that have fandom, but most of these sports leagues, from football to basketball to fighting to all this stuff, the grand majority of the reason that people watch these things is because of gambling. I think that's the understated aspect of all the whole entire sports culture in America, is that we only care because we gamble. We got money on the game. Money on the game is why most of these sports leagues are even thriving. And for miserable husbands who want to get away from their wives and get away for the weekend so they can go have an excuse, which is watching the game, honey. That's another reason. Shout out to El Bundy. But yeah, man, I don't think the Caitlin Clark, and once again, it's not that I think she's a bad player. I think she's a great player. Tremendous skill set. Very entertaining to watch when you watch. But she got put in the wrong body at the wrong place and time. Maybe, here's another thing. Maybe this could be a situation. But I think a lot of these girls would be better off just going off to having families and then just playing in like an amateur league, like a mom league. I think a lot more people would enjoy watching like a mom basketball league, like in their local towns where they play with their little families and stuff. That would be probably way more entertaining, get way more support as opposed to trying to play like legitimate pro basketball because, once again, nobody respects it. And it's not their fault nobody respects it. I'm sorry to run around the same circle, but it's the only people you're going to draw on is gamblers. And most people who are watching sports because gambling are not the type of people that are going to make your sport be able to thrive and survive and be a very marketable thing. Because the way you have to market to those people is not the same that you be marketing to like your average Joe who's working a 9 to 5 who likes to just watch dudes hit each other and play basketball. But anyway, appreciate you guys for listening. Shout out to Caitlin Clark. At least you're doing good, bringing a little bit more money in the eyes of the league and showing how bad the league is. I think, and that's the other thing we got to talk about. That's the other side thing. Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese and the tall Cameron girl, the whatever her name is. I think they're actually doing a greater disservice to the league because now we're watching about how bad the product really is. See, Caitlin Clark, I think before we knew the product was bad, but now that we're watching with like real focus because we're looking at this phenom, we're realizing how poor the product truly is and how bitchy most of the women are who are not even supporting Caitlyn. They're against Caitlyn, which is another whole story inside on a thing to get into. But anyway, appreciate you guys listening. More to come.